сок, вода, молоко. Всем привет and welcome to Russian Readers. And in today's video we're talking about genders in Russian. Basically I'll just teach you how to determine the gender of a noun in Russian. And as you guys may or may not know, Russian has 3 genders. And of course, keep in mind that when we're talking about gender in this context, we're referring to the grammatical gender, which in most cases does not have much to do with physiological or biological gender, because most nouns in a language are inanimate and they can't really possibly have a biological gender. For comparison, English does not have a grammatical gender, right? Of course, it has words like boy, girl, woman, man, even waiter, waitress, right? But if I ask you what gender is milk in English or what gender is water, you're gonna look at me funny and probably ask, what are you talking about? What gender are you referring to? But if you guys have tried learning other languages, other European languages like Russian, Spanish, German, French, you may know that those languages actually have genders, and it's usually a pain in the neck to try to memorize those genders, especially if your first language is English, which essentially does not have a grammatical gender. So regarding the Russian genders, I have good news and bad news. And let's start with the bad news. Unfortunately, in Russian, with the exception of quite a limited number of nouns that logically have usually masculine or feminine gender, such nouns as boy, girl, woman, man, father, mother, sister, brother, etc. 99% of nouns in Russian, including of course all the inanimate nouns, have genders obviously, but there is no logic whatsoever as to which noun takes which gender. In other words, there is no rhyme or reason whatsoever in, say, juice, sok in Russian being masculine, and then voda, water in Russian being feminine, and then milk, молоко being neuter, right? So there's no logic as far as the meanings of these words are concerned. For example, you can't say, okay, all the foods are masculine or all the, furniture items are feminine or something like that. So don't try to find logic there. There is just none. Now to the good news. The good news is that with most nouns, overwhelming majority of nouns in Russian, you can actually easily tell the gender by the noun's ending. And this is exactly what I'll do in this video. I will teach you how to determine a noun's gender in Russian simply by looking at its ending, at the word. Even if you don't know what it means, you can most of the time tell the gender by the ending. So let's start with masculine nouns. So if you see a noun and it has a consonant ending, or what I call a zero ending, in other words, there's no vowel on the end of a noun. So there's no a, o, yeah, or anything like that. It's most likely masculine. Something that may help you remember this rule is the personal pronoun for he in Russian, right? He is, of course, masculine, and in Russian it's on, right? You can see it ends in a consonant. So again, any noun ending in a consonant would most likely be masculine. Let's look at a few examples. You already know sok is masculine, right? Sok definitely ends in a consonant, juice. Then, of course, dom, a house. Телефон, a phone. Stol, stool, right? Table and chair. Banan, right? A banana. Journal, a magazine, etc., etc. Also, guys, be careful with yeah, right? So some students are a little confused by this letter or sound. Officially, yeah is a consonant, right? So if your noun ends in a yeah, then it's masculine, right? Some examples are chai or Mai, right? The month of May, they would be masculine. Okay, guys, now on to feminine nouns. So most feminine nouns in Russian end in either a or ya. Not unlike in Spanish, by the way, right, guys? If you learn Spanish, you may find it helpful, right? In Spanish, it's quite similar for feminine nouns. And something that may help you remember this again is the Russian personal pronoun for she, which is она, right? You can see it ends in an a. And similarly, nouns that end in a or ya, which is a very similar vowel sound, right? A and ya, they kind of rhyme. Then yeah, most likely it's going to be feminine. So let's look at some examples. You already know вода is feminine, right? Water, because it ends in an a. Some other examples would be машина, a car, книга, a book, газета, a newspaper, and an example with a ya is семья, family. And be careful, guys, there are some nouns in Russian that may end in a or ya, but logically they cannot be feminine. So this is the case when meaning would prevail over the grammar ending, right? Such examples are papa, which means dad, дядя, uncle, дедушка, grandfather, right? So those would still be masculine even though they end in a or ya. And let's look at the neuter nouns. So most typically neuter nouns end in either or yeah. And again, something that may help you remember this is the Russian pronoun оно, which means it. And this is actually the name of Stephen King's movie in Russian, It, right? Оно. And this pronoun is a little confusing, by the way. Some students confuse it with это, right? But remember, guys, это is more like this, whereas оно is it, specifically when you refer to neuter nouns. And while оно ends in an o, this is probably the most common neuter ending. But remember also, yeah is pretty common for neuter nouns. So let's look at some examples. You already know молоко, milk. That clearly ends in an o. Other examples would be окно, a window, яблоко, an apple, and for example, море, the sea, for the nouns ending in a "е", or another example is мороженое, ice cream. And here's something to watch out for, by the way, right? So if we take яблоко, which is an apple, it may sound like it's feminine, right? Because if you don't know the way it's spelled, you may think that it ends in an a, right? Because the o on the end of яблоко is unstressed, so it totally sounds like an a. So here it's very important to know the spelling of a noun, right? So the gender is determined by the actual spelling, not pronunciation. So яблоко, even though it sounds like a feminine noun, it is still a neuter noun because it's spelled with an o. Another example would be масло, which is butter, right? Or oil, like olive oil, it's the same word in Russian. Масло also sounds kind of like it's feminine, but it's spelled with an o. So in Russian, масло is also neuter. And there's a couple of other categories that's important to mention here. One pretty big category of Russian nouns are those that end in a soft sign. So when you have a noun that ends in a soft sign, it's practically never neuter. I don't think I can think of any noun that ends in a soft sign in Russian that would be neuter. So it's either feminine or masculine. And unfortunately, there's no certain way to tell whether a noun ending in soft sign is feminine or masculine. I would say most of the time it probably would be feminine. There are probably more feminine nouns ending in a soft sign than masculine. That being said, it can also be masculine, so the only certain way to tell is look it up or ask a native speaker, because sometimes even a noun ending in the same consonant plus a soft sign can be either masculine or feminine. The example I would give you is день, right, ends in an N soft sign, and that means a day, and that's masculine. But then we have осень, which exactly, has the exact same ending, N and a soft sign, and that means the fall or autumn, and that's feminine. I will tell you though that all nouns ending in those weird hissing sounds like, sh, ch, sh, right? If those have a soft sign, then it's pretty much 100% feminine. Examples would be дочь, which kind of makes sense, yeah, right, because it means daughter. Ночь, night, мышь, mouse, etc. And of course, there are some nouns, mostly foreign words that we borrowed from other languages into Russian that have, some weird endings that don't look like any of the gender endings I listed previously, right? So the rule of thumb here is when in doubt, assume neuter. A couple of examples here. Menu, a menu, right, ends in a U. So that's neuter. And another example is taxi, a taxi, ends in an E. And of course, E or I most of the time would be a plural ending, right, as you may know. But taxi is not plural, it's just a foreign word, and it is also neuter. And of course, guys, there are exceptions always. I don't want to overwhelm you with, dozens of exceptions here in this video, but, don't be surprised if occasionally you see a noun that's supposed to be one gender, but it's actually different gender. A couple of examples that come to mind are имя and время, right? They both end in a ya, but they're both neuter, even though they're supposed to be feminine, right, by the ending. Имя means a name, and время means time. So remember, both of those nouns are neuter. And if you have a plural noun in Russian, it doesn't really matter what gender it is. Usually the plural form in Russian is not gender sensitive. So the most common plural ending in Russian is uy or I. Occasionally, some nouns may end in an a or ya. That's not uncommon either. So if you see a noun that ends in an a or ya, don't always assume 100% it's feminine. It may be plural, right? For example, глаза, eyes, or деревья, trees, right? So they may actually be just plural nouns. If you'd like to review plural nouns and plural noun endings in Russian, be sure to watch our video on nominative case, where I also covered plural noun endings. And here's a little test. I'm going to give you guys a few nouns in Russian, and you will try to determine what genders they are. Pause the video if you need a couple of seconds to think, but I will be telling you the answers pretty much right away in just a couple of seconds for each noun. So let's start with vino, wine, vino. What gender would that be? Of course, vino is neuter because it ends in an o. Your next noun is karandash. Karandash, a pencil. So what gender is karandash? Karandash is masculine because it ends in a consonant, right? Sh is definitely consonant, so it's masculine. Ruchka, a pen. Ruchka. What's the gender? Of course, ruchka is feminine because it ends in an a. Kresla. Kresla is an armchair or like a recliner. So what gender would be kresla? Well, it's a little tricky. Of course, you saw the spelling of it on the screen, so you probably guessed it correctly. It is neuter, but by the sound of it, you might assume it's feminine, right? Because it sounds like it ends in an a. So be very careful. Always check the actual spelling of your noun. Собака, a dog. Собака. What's the gender? Собака is feminine because it ends in an a. And actually, it's a little funny because, a dog can be feminine or masculine. I mean, the actual dog, right, can be a boy or a girl. But that doesn't matter. Again, as far as the noun is concerned, we agree it with feminine endings, right? For example, if we agree it with other parts of speech, собака is a feminine noun, even if we're referring to a male dog. Здание, a building. Здание. What gender? Здание is neuter because it ends in a ye. Помидор, tomato. Помидор. What's the gender of помидор? Of course, помидор is masculine because it ends in a consonant. And finally, тетрадь, a notebook. Тетрадь. I'm just gonna let you guess this one because you can't definitively tell the gender. There are actually two options, but go ahead and take a guess and see if you did it right or not. Well, тетрадь is actually feminine, but again, you can't really know it What you can know with certainty is that it can be neuter, but all nouns ending in a soft sign are either masculine or feminine. This one happens to be feminine, so remember the word for notebook in Russian, тетрадь, is feminine. Okay guys, as always, I hope this video was helpful. If so, be sure to hit the like button. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to put them in the comment section below. Remember to subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our app, Russian Readers. It has a lot of useful stories that can help you learn both vocabulary and grammar, develop your listening skills, develop your reading skills. And well, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in our next video. Спасибо и пока-пока.